My name is Jalen Proctor, and today I'm going to be doing my speech on labeling psychopathic tendencies. I want you to imagine that you wake up and are confined in a small room with concrete floor and tied to a chair. It's cold, and you've been here for what feels like only a few minutes, but it's really been a couple hours. There's no windows and no clock to tell what time of day it is, and no one for you to talk to. Your mind is going in a million directions, and you're slowly starting to lose yourself. You were put here to be cured, but in reality, you're going even more insane. It is no doubt that we live in a world of judgment. Labeling someone or stereotyping someone isn't our natural human instinct to do so. But labeling someone's mental illness off a checklist is not the moral thing to do. Although it is more difficult to depict out on who is classified as being a psychopath and who is not, we see and label things as black and white rather than seeing the gray hue. With not understanding psychopathy, we tend to wrongfully accuse and label those who may contain psychopathic tendencies according to a checklist that was used 50 plus years ago. The term psychopath was dubbed by a 19th century German psychiatrist J.L. Koch, of whom coined the term psychopathische, of which by literal definition means suffering soul. The psychiatrist had argued that psychopathy arose from a flaw in one's constitution at birth. Like him and other notable early psychiatrists had described the mental phenomenon as mania without delusions, alienation to the mind, and moral insanity and moral imbecility. These definitions complement the legacy and concept of psychopathy. As the study of psychopathy continued to evolve into the modern era, psychopathic individuals were no longer perceived as no sociologic curiosities, but rather the individuals who defy universal standard to attempt social redemption, the act itself being equivalent to an attribution of mental status. Only affecting around 1% of the population, psychopathy has rippled the impacting society immeasurably. The extent of which psychopathy has impacted society historically and presently varies, as there is no universal definition of the word psychopath. Developed by psychologist Robert Hare, the Psychopath Checklist, or the PCLR, consists of 20 characteristics that psychopaths tend to possess, such as grandiose sense of self-worth and lack of empathy. The fourth edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM-IV, complements the plight of the PCLR. Author John Bronson of the book Psychopath Test concludes that both forms of the diagnostics are powerful and intoxicating weapons that are capable of inflicting terrible damage. Throughout Bronson's book, he questions the safety of any one person wielding the power to diagnose, as documenting the occasions of which psychiatrists have become overzealous in the labeling as scarce. The psychopath test concludes that the PCLR and the DSM-IV contradict the reality of psychopathy, neglecting its spectrum by the nature as a matter of convenience, as psychopathic individuals come in, quote-unquote, all shapes and sizes. However, media attention is needed to validate their aberrant behavior or not. Modern media has also evolved into other inaccurate avenue of the world of mental health. As the media has almost exponentially become part of daily life, the distinction between appropriate labeling and inappropriate labeling has become blurred. Notably, he notion of our inability to trace potentially psychopathic individuals throughout mankind's existence cannot be precluded. Two examples of psychopathic individuals in history in their respective eras are Ted Bundy and Leopold II. King Leopold II of Belgium had established the Free Congo state, of which he ruled from 1885 to 1908. During this period of Belgian colonization, Leopold II had encouraged extreme violence, resulting in the suffering and death of 5 to 20 million Congolese. Through the documentation, the Belgian king had colonized this the Congo to civilize the inferior race and expose them to the way of gods, or to the way of God. Like other European world powers within the modern era had successfully executed tainting the population of millions. Perhaps these dominating world powers sought to satisfy psychopathic tendencies. In the case of Leopold II, the source that embodied his greed was wild rubber. Note the birth motorized vehicles in 1886. The violence had endured with the imperialism of the Congo. A state included beatings and lashings to enforce meeting rubber gathering quotas. Many powerful individuals have sought to satisfy their greed. A number of casualties has effortlessly been attached to their name. Nonetheless, the possibility of those people possessing psychopathic traits cannot be ruled out because we simply don't know. Ted Bundy, one of the most notorious criminals in the 20th century, undoubtedly contributes to the number of psychopathic individuals among prisons and jails populations of which are disproportionately large, according to Stephen Morse, Harvard graduate and expert in criminal law. Ironically, Morse argues that the motive for violent crimes is rarely mental illness. Though statistically verified, in prevalent political addresses about shootings, particularly shooters, are discussed in a feeble manner by political leaders. Many of those shooters misdiagnosed as mentally ill, consequently procrastinating the acknowledgement of the damage inflicted. The American serial killer and rapist had confessed to 28 murders in 5 U.S. states, although it is estimated that he is responsible for hundreds of deaths. He finally faced execution in Florida's electric chair in 1989. The legacy of Ted Bundy can be reflected in media's prevalent attention towards documentaries, fictional books, and even songs that attempt to lyrically idolize the nature of psychopathic individuals, in a potentially naive tone, highlighting the reality of psychopathy is all around us, indicating that psychopathy in nature has not only catalyzed the advancement of psychopathy and commonplace information, but has perhaps honed and overlooked significance throughout history. Ted Bundy and Leopold II were both individuals with psychopathic tendencies, undoubtedly leaning towards the more saturated end of the spectrum. In both cases, both men's father figure were abusive and envisioned an unattainable psychopathic image. And through their respective upbringings, both were traumatized by, both were traumatized and recreated a disturbing image of their own, whether it be killing at an early age or hoping to preserve a legacy of immortalization colonization. Consequently, a rippling effect of nature and nurture, as many concepts and terms that embody a vast spectrum typically recreate. Remarkably, both Bundy and Leopold found their ways to the higher tiers of society and maintained a position of power that affected numerous people. Regarding Leopold, he was born into a noble family and would soon rule over Belgium, and despite his immoral greed or actions, he managed to maintain an overwhelming presence over millions. In the case of Ted Bundy, although he was no king, he ironically was enough. He worked with mental health, working in the suicide hotline. Graduating from University of Washington, he later worked with Washington State Governor Ross Davis. In a study conducted by Robert Hare, the creator of the psychopath checklist, he had concluded that it is 4 to 5 times more likely for corporate professionals, including CEOs, directors, and supervisors, to be a very high-scoring psychopath. The conclusion for this study is reinforced when analyzing and reciting the stories of notorious Ted Bundy and Leopold II, respectively. The mental dilemma of psychopathy is still not well understood. Additional in nature, people with psychopathic tendencies are so interpersonally and behaviorally abnormal that attempting to isolate the definition of psychopathy as a disorder seems justifiable. Media and imprecise perspectives have encouraged individuals to label others with a very terrible black and white mindset, ignoring the reality and the gray hues in between. Even though psychopathy affects only 1% internally, needing to objectify diagnosing individuals are arguably psychopathic. Although not much is understood about psychopathy, the term psychopath has enjoyed wide currency in popular culture and among professionals, maintaining an intriguing yet dangerous reputation. To prevent further damage of psychopathy from misdiagnosed to the reputation of the mental dilemma globally, the world of psychopathy and psychiatry needs to create a universal definition of the word psychopath. While acknowledge the spectrum of the illness, as professor in clinical psychology summarizes, psychopathy is a scale. While acknowledging the vastness, the psychopathy is in nature. Reassessing the credibility to current way we diagnose and persevere psychopathy is necessary. Impressively understanding the nature of the concept of psychopathy exponentially increased within the last 50 years alone. Although media's current disregard of implementing credible knowledge of mental health and how the word psychopath is persevered culturally across the globe is overlooked. Directing instead of misleading society's perspective of the genuine nature of the concept and how it's persevered in media can underlie the influence and the reputation of itself, as well as people who identify being a psychopath. Considering psychopathy historically and prevalent definition of psychopath, timelessly observing mankind, aren't we all a little psychopathic? Thank you for listening to my speech.